To all who are new here, my name is Dr. Michelle Henney, and I'd like to welcome you to Releve Sports Medicine's Virtual Journal Club. For additional webinar educational opportunities, you can visit our website and register directly for the webinar or sign up for the email list to be notified of upcoming webinars. We are continuing to update our schedule, so check back often. This video will be available for review after the Journal Club. The information contained in the video content represents the views and opinions of the presenters and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Releve Sports Medicine. The mere appearance of video content on the website does not constitute an endorsement by Releve Sports Medicine or its affiliates of such video content. The video content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The video content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have read or seen on the site. Releve Sports Medicine hereby disclaims any and all liability to any party for any direct, indirect, implied, punitive, special, incidental, or other consequential damages arising directly or indirectly from any use of the video content, which is provided as is and without warranties. We are looking for an athletic trainer to join our team. This is a full-time clinic-based position working in a sports medicine clinic. BMO certification is preferred. Please feel free to pass our information along if you know of a qualified candidate. More information regarding applying can be found on our website. For all athletic trainers who are intending to get live CEUs from the BOC, you will receive an email 1 hour after the webinar concludes, which includes a link to the combined quiz, evaluation, and assessment. You will have up to 72 hours to complete the quiz and the evaluation. This email will come from customercare@gotowebinar.com. Please ensure that this is done to receive your statement of credit. If you don't receive the follow-up email or you have any other concerns, then contact us via our email at journalclub@relevesportsmedicine.com. Once the statement of credit is available for download from our website, you will receive an email notification. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit the question and we will review questions at the conclusion of the presentation. If you cannot see the PowerPoint slides and you're accessing the webinar from your mobile phone, swipe the screen to the left or to the right and the slides will become visible. The recording will be available for review from our website tomorrow. Our speaker today is Dr. Sara Lynn Terrell. She currently serves as an Associate Professor of Exercise Science and the Exercise Science Program Director at Florida Southern College. Sara has professional experiences in collegiate strength and conditioning, collegiate athletics, disease state management, wellness program initiatives, and several facets of the fitness industry. She holds national certifications from the National Strength and Conditioning Association and USA Weightlifting. Sara is an active member in the National Strength and Conditioning Association, recently serving in state and national leadership roles. Her research interests span the multiplicity of her professional endeavors and include a variety of areas such as, but not limited to, enhancing athletic performance across the lifespan, including those of pickleball athletes, exploring non-operative and return-to-play protocols for femoroacetabular impingement, FAI, and discovering high-impact leadership and coaching practices. With over 20 years of education experience, her continued goal is to optimize quality of life through exercise and to inspire future healthcare practitioners to do the same. She is speaking today about pickleball injuries.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Henney. I'm so excited to be here today. We have a central question that we're looking to solve through this talk, and that is, are we in a pickle? So let's get started. I have no conflict of interest in presenting this particular content. However, I will say, in the spirit of full disclosure, that I love this sport. I started to play about 4 years ago as an incredible skeptic because I thought I was way too athletic. You know, this wasn't for me. It was a sign that I was aging. And then I just got taken to town by someone about 20 plus years older than me, and I was hooked ever since. So I started to do some personal and professional inquiry. I wanted to know what was out there in the research. So I'm going to share some of that with you today.
And I'll actually, do you think, can you click so it shows your screen?
Oh, we're not showing? There we go.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Okay, there it is. So let's talk about our objectives. Are those showing, Dr. Henny?
Yes, they are.
All right, fantastic. All right, let's take a look at the objectives for tonight. So first and foremost, I want to identify the movement and really physiological demands of pickleball. I want to try to detail research that I've been able to find so far within this particular area, and hopefully be able to show some information regarding injuries. And then lastly, I want to talk a little bit about proactive educational strategies that practitioners can implement to positively support athletes who are participating in pickleball. So this is our roadmap for tonight. But I would like to provide a little bit of an introduction before we get to these three key objectives this evening. So let me provide a little bit of an introduction to this particular sport. This is the fastest growing racket sport in the United States, according to the Sport and Fitness Industry Association. And it's actually held this title for the last 3 years. The predominant participant demographics happen to be folks that are over the age of 55. But I'm guessing if you tune into ESPN or any other sports kind of outlet, you are going to see folks that are participating in the Professional Pickleball Association Tour. And many of those demographics are 20 to 30 somethings, and they're making big bucks off of playing this particular sport. Pickleball challenges both our health and skill domains. So when I say health domains, I mean things like your aerobic capacity, your muscle endurance. When I say skill domains, I'm talking about your reaction time, your hand-eye coordination, your agility. So those are all great bonuses, right? That's fantastic that we can get this from this particular sport. But for those of you in the audience that have patience, or maybe you're actually playing, there's a little bit of an addictive nature to this sport, right? There's a motivational element. So I want to share with you some results of some psychosocial research that has been done about why people feel so connected to this particular sport. I'm going to provide 3 kind of centralized themes I was able to discern from the references that you can see listed here. So the question was, through survey-based research and interviews, why do you love this sport? Folks were over the age of 50 in the lion's share of these, and these were regular picklers, meaning they played once or twice a week at least. What they said, why do I love it, besides the health and skill domains, is because it promotes social interaction, optimism, and life satisfaction. In the Bazzelli and Draper psychosocial article, they actually did some additional types of follow-up. And I want to share a couple of things from those interviews that I think are kind of interesting and something that I could certainly relate to. Participants noted that pickleball is a sport that affords a physically appropriate competitive athletic experience. In fact, it kind of reignites a little bit of competitiveness that you might have had if you were a high school athlete or a college athlete. The small court allows participants to navigate the game's challenges pretty well, maybe even compared to like a larger court like tennis. And really, in engaging in leisure, it's going to help adults negotiate that aging process through the pursuit of sport. So lots of wonderful things here. The psychosocial piece, though, in terms of the research, is really in one particular demographic, right? The little bit older population. So from a gap in literature, this is a great area for us to maybe explore using the template from these researchers in a younger population, especially maybe those folks who maybe their motivation might certainly be financial, but I also think there's other reasons as well. Just a little bit more on the introduction here that I want to provide for you. There's been recent publicity that you may have seen on the financial investments and the concern on the potential financial costs associated with injury. Now, you may know a couple of these athletes that came into view here. So people like Tom Brady. This is Kim Clijsters, who was a Belgian tennis athlete. At one point, I think she was #1 in both singles and doubles at one point in her career. Who else could we add? LeBron James, Kevin Mahomes, or not, Kevin Durant, sorry, Patrick Mahomes. Lots of famous folks that are investing their direct discretionary income into sponsorship and building facilities for pickleball. We certainly have seen the investment into facilities here in the state of Florida. You also may have come across some information this summer regarding projections on the financial impact of injuries related to pickleball. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this particular article that was driven by Andrew Mock and colleagues. And these folks are really what we consider to be analysts, all right? They're part of the Global Research and Evidence Lab. They collect, they analyze data, and they kind of strategize with large companies about ways to hopefully give them market insight to support their businesses. What this group did is they took a variety of different search terms, things like hip replacement, knee replacement, pickleball participation rate, and did what I consider to be some whiz statistics, right? Their whole goal was to come up with a financial estimate of what they thought the pickleball injury financial number would be. So what came out in the media, which you might have heard, was estimations of anywhere from, say, $250 million to $500 million annually of direct medical costs associated with playing pickleball. However, I will say we don't necessarily know that for sure. There's challenges in getting a full picture of what it is that we are dealing with here today. But again, as an audience member, you may be thinking kind of anecdotally that yes, you are starting to see an uptick in your clinic. But anytime we try to put a dollar figure to that healthcare cost, it's difficult no matter what the condition or what the sport. Before I get to kind of looking at the movement demands of pickleball, I want to give you a background about the sport, even more in the background about the court, which is what you see here today. So the game of pickleball is thought to have originated in the 1960s as a family's quest to provide entertainment to their kids. So they took whatever they had in the garage and tried to throw a game together. Hence, pickleball is often described as a hybrid between ping pong, tennis, badminton, racquetball, and it can be played indoors or outdoors, but you notice the court is smaller than a tennis court. It's 20 feet wide by 44 feet long. The paddle that you play with is actually pretty lightweight, and it's just a little bit bigger than a ping pong paddle. And the ball is perforated like a wiffle ball, so it's going to have holes in it. Like tennis, you can play in singles, you can play in doubles. The goal is to try to play to 11, win by 2. So that's kind of just a quick little overview of what goes into utilization of this court and a few of the kinds of things that we will see with it. What I want to do next is show you just a brief video. We may or may not have the sound to this video, so we'll kind of see how it goes. But I want you to just kind of pay attention to how persons are moving, where they're positioning themselves on the court, and then we'll continue to explore some of the movement demands that this video hopefully is also showing us. So let's see what we get. All right, so we may not have the sound with this, which is okay. And obviously this is in a little bit of slow motion, but you're gonna notice the obviously side-to-side movement. This is a doubles match where we're playing right up at the kitchen line, which is that point where you can't really cross into that zone right by the net. So similarly to tennis, what you're going to find is we have to start the game with a serve, but unlike tennis, it's going to be an underhand serve. And you can see this person kind of getting it started right now. All right, and then we have a double bounce rule. So if you're on the volley or on the side reserving the seed, you got to let it bounce. If it's coming back to you after serving, you also have to let it bounce, and then it's game on. And again, you notice how in this particular video, everybody's kind of up at the net. So they can't step into that area right next to the net unless a ball has dropped into there. But I like to kind of show this so you can kind of see how things get started and a little bit of the movement that can go on with this particular sport. Oops. Okay. So just with that little video recap, I think it's important to note that this is clearly my opinion on this bullet point that's coming in. I think this is a great sport where there's a mismatch of one's perceived skills and really what their actual skills might be. In other words, the pessimist in me as an exercise scientist is to let you know that we have a pretty deconditioned society. So when folks get started playing this, they go, oh, you know, this is easy, I can do this. And their perception of what they can do and their perception of the difficulty and the demands of the sport don't match reality. And sometimes that can be a perfect storm. This is also a population in need of holistic training and education. And so training certainly to improve performance and hopefully reduce that injury risk, but also education, because it's a great sport to fall into the trap of playing for hours on end and exposing your system to repetition, which can lead to injuries. As I mentioned earlier, there's an absence of significant research on this particular sport, especially compared to other racket sports. If you're in the audience and you've had a patient, you've got something unique related to a pickleball patient, I would encourage you to see if you can get something published about that, because we need to continue to see more and more information out there on this particular sport. So let's get into understanding the sport a little bit more with a needs analysis approach. First and foremost, like we hopefully saw in that video, pickleball is a sport that has a variety of different technical skills. I'll just go ahead and say the disclaimer here. I happen to know the person in this video and she has no backhand. So this is why she opted to show you those pictures. But the technical skills, underhand, forehand, backhand, overhead, and something that we would consider to be a dink or a finesse shot. Usually this is happening when you're trying to be right up at that kitchen and hit a real kind of fine drop shot on the other side of the net. Now, thinking about what you probably know with tennis or other racket sports, you know, even if you're not as familiar with pickleball, obviously we have an implement in the distal end segment. Okay, so from an upper extremity perspective, this is going to place a lot of that movement demand in that glenohumeral joint region. And, you know, proper muscle endurance and strength of those rotator cuff muscles are going to be needed, but certainly proper scapulothoracic function is also going to be needed to support that movement at the shoulder. With the gripping and a lot of that intricate forearm and wrist work, we do see stress certainly on the elbow and the wrist. This is also a sport that's incredibly multiplanar. Persons need to be able to move laterally, which you, again, should have seen some of that in the video, forward, backwards, while executing technical racket skills. So there has to be a lot of good pelvic stability and control, and certainly eccentric control would fit into that as well. And then from a movement demand perspective, I think especially as you watch some of the higher level athletes, you're going to probably see this. But again, with an implement sport, right, we should see kind of that summation of forces from that distal end segment from the ground through that thoracic spine, transferred ultimately to that end segment. And that can definitely happen if we have good mobility through that T-spine. A lot of times folks are restricted in that area, so that's going to limit that transfer of power. So then the question becomes, where is that then dissipating to? But nonetheless, when you watch some of those higher performing athletes, you will see this certainly come to light. The next question here would be, what are the physiological demands associated with pickleball? In other words, is this a sport that can challenge your cardiovascular system enough to have perhaps a training benefit or a health benefit? And I would say, quite frankly, yeah, I think that's the case. Smith and colleagues was the first article that kind of came out looking at the physiological demands associated with pickleball. They had a small sample. It was an N of 15, middle-aged adults about 65 years of age. The dose that they received was to play for 60 minutes, play pickleball 60 minutes 3 times a week for 6 weeks. When the researchers assessed the intensity, what they found was that participants eclipsed an intensity of greater than 4 METs, or a metabolic equivalent. All we have to remember about METs is this, is that the higher the MET, the higher the oxygen cost and the demand on the body. Now, longitudinal exercise science research would tell you that for you to have health benefits, meaning to actually have enough of a dose to maybe change cardiometabolic disease risk profile, you have to be in that moderate zone, which is exactly what this is. It's within that zone of 3 to 5.9 METs, which is recommended by the American College of Sports Medicine as being that sweet spot for making a difference in somebody's health profile. So what happened in this particular study? High density lipoprotein, HDL, went up, which is what we want actually, and that's a good response to exercise. Resting blood pressure went down, and overall aerobic capacity improved. So results of this study might tell us, maybe pickleball is a viable intervention for meeting intensity thresholds to obtain health benefits in this particular population. But there was some inter-subject variability, smaller sample size, and so certainly this is a great area for us to maybe try to explore in the future, maybe with a younger demographic. Fast forward about 4 years later, Denning and colleagues continued to explore this idea of what are the physiological demands associated with pickleball. Now, what was a little bit different in this particular study was the way that they kind of measured variables. And you may see that image in that top right corner. They placed the participants in a hexoskin, which is a biometric garment with cardiac sensors kind of sewn into the fabric to allow them to measure the variables that they were most interested in tracking. The participants were indeed younger. The average age was about 38 years of age, and they were fairly active. Now, the experimental design was a little bit different. It was a counterbalance design. So all 25 participants in this case walked for 30 minutes at a self-directed pace, whatever that was. And then they, after rest, played in a pickleball game for 30 minutes with a partner. Okay, so basically a doubles match. Let's take a look at the variables or the differences in the variables based on walking versus playing pickleball. Peak heart rate, meaning that highest heart rate that was achieved, the nod went to pickleball. You notice it was about 153 beats per minute compared to about 129 for walking. The average heart rate was about 119 beats per minute compared to about 105 for walking. A greater caloric expenditure was associated with pickleball. Total steps accrued a little bit more in walking, but the rate of perceived exertion using a classic 6 to 20 Borg scale favored the pickleball athletes. And I would surmise that that is because of the intervals associated with pickleball. So for instance, you can have short duration, high intensity types of volleys that are going to challenge your phosphagen and glycolytic energy systems. And then you might have these extended volleys, which is going to certainly challenge your aerobic capacity. And for all of us in the audience, most of us should know anyway, the benefits of interval training. It can certainly have a great conditioning effect, but you also notice here it's pretty good for return on investment in terms of caloric expenditure. So I'm guessing that part of that RPE was linked to the interval type of nature with this sport. Now, the other thing I want to share about this particular article was they asked the participants a simple question on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the most enjoyable and 1 being the least enjoyable. Which one did you like better? And everybody in the pickleball group, remember this is an N of 25, gave pickleball a 5 out of 5 compared to a 2 out of 5 on that Likert scale for walking. I like to share that because it connects back to that introduction when I had summarized some of the psychosocial pieces related to this particular sport. And it really does tell us that if folks like something, maybe they may continue to play it. And so, hey, according to this, they're also going to maybe get a great workout while they also enjoy playing the sport. I've provided a little bit, I hope, and kind of an overview of the movement demands, so you can kind of see what happens in a pickleball game. I've talked a little bit about the physiological aspects that could be associated with playing pickleball. And now I want to talk about injury risk and provide for you some literature that I've been able to find regarding this topic of injury in the sport of pickleball. The first two things I'm going to start with are going to be articles that were published by Forrester and Weiss. Now, both of these particular articles draw their data from the same data source. And so let me kind of read that data source for you because it's a little bit of a mouthful for me. It was the National Electronic Injury Surveillance System of the United States Consumer Product Safety Commission, okay, or the kind of the NICE or the NES, however you put the inflection point data set. This report, the N of Forrester, documented 300 reported pickleball injuries from this time period. The time period was 2001 to 2017. All right. Now, if you dig into this article a little bit more, you're going to see some bigger projections and some bigger numbers besides the N of 300 that I'm going to present here today. But what I want to just focus on are those things that could be identified specifically to pickleball injuries from this emergency department data set. So let's get some descriptive kinds of information. Of the N of 300, which age bracket saw the highest number of injuries? That age bracket greater than 60 years of age, okay? If we actually go down another decade and we add the 50-somethings, okay, 50 to 59, to the 60 to 69, 70 to 79, that percent gets close to 90% of that N of 300 being associated with that age bracket. What region of the body was most injured in this particular data set? Lower body. What was the most common injury assessed here? A strain, a sprain, or a fracture. Now, the gender distribution of injury was fairly evenly distributed with this particular set. Again, 2001 to 2017. Now, let's take a look at what Weiss did. Not too much longer, this particular article came out. And again, using the same data set, National Electronic Injury Surveillance System. And what they did here was try to capture a timestamp a little bit further along. So this is 2010 to 2019. Weiss also tried to take the lens of comparing pickleball to tennis to see what we could gather in terms of some descriptive information. Okay, so in this particular N523, again, a little bit different timestamp, The age that had the highest number of injuries were persons between the age of 60 to 79 years of age. It comprised about 81% of this particular data set. Now, Weiss actually tried to tease out what were common mechanisms of action. The top mechanism of action contributing to the injury was a slip, trip, fall, or dive. And the most common injury was a sprain or a strain. All right. So similarly, we see some overlap, certainly with the Forrester piece. All right. But what was different, from the Forrester piece was that in this particular analysis, the upper body was actually the region that had a higher distribution of injury. Not by much, but what the authors really kind of focused in on here with the upper body was the concern related to the wrist. So if you can imagine, and I've actually seen this unfortunately happen, somebody take a fall and obviously land on an outstretched arm. It's a great opportunity, to fracture or break a wrist. Now, the problem, I will say, if we look at the Forrester article and the Weiss article, it doesn't necessarily capture our current decade, okay? And there's some trouble with precision in these search terms, okay? Whether something was coded a particular way, the lack of consistent terms and trying to work through this data could actually give us false positives or negatives. So getting a true estimation is a little bit of a challenge. But I still wanted to provide this information for you because I think conceptually, maybe what you're experiencing with your clinic, with the pickleball patients that you might be seeing, I would guess they probably have come to you with some of these things that these particular articles unpack. Now I want to switch gears and talk more about case reports that are out there in the literature. Vitale and Liu have an article published in the American College of Sports Medicine, Current Sports Medicine Report. And they detail a unique combination injury that happened to a 71-year-old male who was an avid pickleballer. This person felt a sharp posterior thigh pain and popping sensation on returning a volley. And upon physical examination, it was notable for ischial tuberosity and proximal posterior thigh tenderness. There was pain with resisted leg press and straight leg hip extension. X-ray, MRI completed. So what were the findings? There was a small area of ossification in the proximal hamstrings, and there was a full thickness tear, near full width tear of the hamstrings at the ischial attachment, all right, with retraction of the torn fibers. And there was also an avulsed bone fragment. Now, the combination that was kind of unique was that there was a full thickness, full width tear of the left adductor magnus tendon at its ischial attachment with distal retraction of the torn fibers. No avulsion bone fragment, though. The authors spend some time kind of unpacking this particular injury. Obviously, it's kind of a unique case because of the combination. It's not that we don't necessarily, we see hamstring tears, all right, but to have an adductor magnus piece along with that might be a little bit unique. But the adductor magnus could, in theory, be considered part of the hamstrings because of the similar embryogenesis, innervation, blood supply, and in part connection to hip extension. And this mechanism of action here could very well have been strong eccentric contraction, maybe even that sudden change in direction, which we would certainly associate with tears of the hamstring, and even in this, obviously this case, the adductor magnus. So what's a takeaway here with this unique case? This is a high trauma situation, and we may think of a high trauma type of situation with a younger population, but it happened here to a 71-year-old. And so I would like to advocate that certainly chronological age doesn't necessarily tell us a skeletal age. So even though this is an injury, as a high-performing athlete, this wasn't somebody maybe necessarily who hadn't played before. So it just gives us a good insight that we could see certainly high types of trauma injuries, certainly in an older population, but it would certainly leave the door open for a younger population as well. Continuing with the kind of case series, I want to talk about the Atkinson case and the Huang and Grevin cases that have come out here recently. And these are related to the ocular concerns for playing pickleball. In the Atkinson article, they detailed two ocular cases, a 66-year-old male and a 60-year-old female, that had really the same story. They both took a pickleball directly to the eye. And the symptoms of some type of eye trauma actually took a little while to unpack. It was about 7 to 9 days before they started to present some symptoms. And those things were like flashes, floaters, blurred vision. And ultimately, both of them had some varying degree of a retinal detachment. Huang and Grevin is an article that I included here that was published ahead of print here in 2023. And they too detail two ocular case reports, but you notice that the age is a little bit different. It's a little bit older, into their mid to late 70s, male and female, take a ball to the eye. And ultimately what resulted was a level of lens subluxation. What the authors note here, though, is that these two had pre-existing conditions, like macular degeneration was one of them in particular. And those levels of pre-existing conditions, the authors postulate, further exacerbated the ocular injury, and certainly that time to return back to play safely. So when you take these case reports together, I think there's a clear message, and that is that persons playing the sport should consider wearing ocular protection. All right, some type of protective eye gear. The video piece, I kept emphasizing, notice where they're playing. They're playing right at that line, okay, not stepping into the kitchen. So what they've done is now truncated the play zone. And it's easy to be fooled that, it's a perforated ball. It has holes in it, right? Like, how fast could that ball actually travel? Well, maybe 30 to 40 miles an hour. And if you don't have the reaction time to protect yourself, it's easy to certainly get hit in the eye. But the other thing that happens here is that folks take an injury to the eye from a racket. Again, if you're playing in doubles in a small amount of space and you happen to just be at the wrong place at the wrong time, maybe as somebody's kind of finishing a swing, that too is another way of having some type of ocular trauma. So it's definitely something that we want to keep in mind moving forward. So let's recap some of the injury evidence that's been out there. Weiss and Forrester reported some data about emergency room cases that were linked some way, shape, or form in a search inquiry to the word pickleball. They were different time periods, certainly not within the decade that we're in, but it really did give us a good overview that sprains, strains, fractures often are our top types of injuries. The region of the body, fairly split. The Forrester was lower body, Weiss the upper body, and also kind of split on gender distribution of injury. But in both of these particular analyses of that data set, what was interesting is that with increasing age, saw the highest number of injuries. Vital and Liu 2020 had a hamstring and adductor magnus tendon situation that was really kind of unique. And we see some ocular injuries associated with the four kind of individual cases that I just referenced from Atkinson and Huang and Grevin. Now, I did provide the audience a recent review from Cassell's, and honestly, I did that because it was a 2023 article, and I felt like I should get y'all something from this particular year. But what they try to do is they try to kind of summarize some of the injury research. A couple of the articles that I've detailed here today are found in that particular reference. There's a few things that I maybe take, I'm not real keen about with that particular article, but if you want something as a fast reference and something that also gives you some just overall references on that reference page to do some more digging, that may be a good article to keep in mind. But if you're really going to do additional digging, I would encourage you to pull out the Vital and Liu article. I think that probably would be great for you to have in your back pocket. All right, and then lastly, to recap on the needs analysis summary, this is a sport that requires reaction time, it's multiplanar, and boy, you need to have some good body control. With a racket sport, we're certainly going to see stress to that upper extremity, but we've also detailed that our lower extremity can certainly have an injury risk. And speaking of risk, as we assess all of this information, it's pretty clear that there can be a risk associated with playing any sport, including pickleball. But I also detailed for you tonight the benefit, okay, whether that's motivation, life satisfaction, maybe even a little bit of cardiovascular conditioning. So as anything that we're weighing, we have to always ask ourselves, what is the benefit to the risk ratio when we're trying to make a decision? So the third and final thing I want to talk about today is from my dog, Ollie, who's incredibly insightful here. And his question is, what do we do? How can practitioners positively support athletes participating in pickleball? Let's take a look. Step number one that I would recommend is to assess your community. A couple weeks ago in Winter Haven, there was a pretty big pickleball tournament, and there were players from all different age brackets, but there was a lot of excitement, happening there. So I would encourage you to reach out to your community and see where this sport is being played. Ask your patients. If you're seeing somebody who's rehabbing an injury from pickleball, get the scoop. Where are they playing? And introduce yourself to that recreation center director, to the fitness center director, right? Work some tournaments. That's going to put you out in front of the community in a way that's going to allow you to do step number two, and that is facilitate education. We really need to get out on the front end of this because the participation numbers are up. It only makes sense that we're going to continue to see potential injuries also concurrently rising. So as those practitioners, finding a way to facilitate education at any time point is going to really go a long way. My first area regarding education, okay, is this idea from Yoda, who says it very, very well, gradual approach and a patient approach, in the sense that it's so easy to get caught up in playing this particular sport, for hours and hours on end. I would be willing to bet that many of you have been dealing with kind of the chronic overuse injuries with your patients for pickleball, because it's very similar to what we would see maybe with other racket sports. You might have rotator cuff tendinopathy, lateral epicondylitis, medial epicondylitis, an acute trauma to the wrist, perhaps maybe higher in females, and that's certainly something we would want to think about if there's bone mineral density concerns, and certainly that can happen across gender, but we do see that particularly with women. From a lower body perspective, overuse, if we're not taking this gradual approach and being patient as we introduce our body to a new stimulus, maybe some type of meniscal pathology, patellar tendinopathy, medial collateral strain, osteoarthritic flare, and the ones that I continue to see are Achilles concerns and plantar fasciitis. which again, from an education approach, kind of lends itself to going, what are they wearing, right? What kind of court shoe certainly are they in? That's one particular thing to think about. So from a gradual approach, we can try to minimize any type of acute inflammation, especially turning into a long-term kind of problem. Now, another piece of Yoda advice here regarding the gradual approach in our role as educators, I do want to provide a nod to the environment here today. And Weiss and colleagues in that particular article do talk about heat-related injuries, and we typically do track that with traditional sport injury data sets. And for pickleballers, we should keep that in mind as well. Heat stress is certainly going to impair muscle function and impair that neural drive to the muscle. If we're talking about our older adult demographic, they may have some autonomic nervous system impairment, and that's going to reduce their thermoregulation capability. So just, being mindful of that. Maybe it's, especially in July and August here, it's a great time to maybe play indoors or play early, before it really heats up with the day. But I don't want to not address that, because I do think we have to be very careful when we're exposing the system, certainly to an exercise stress, but an exercise stress in an incredibly hot environment. Now, besides the gradual approach, the other example education piece I want to plug here as a strategy is to encourage your patients, your clients, your athletes to do an ADWU, which is just code for active dynamic warm-up, before they hit the court. I'm going to give you a little challenge here today, and maybe you can send me the results of this challenge, but just humor me and ask your patient, client, athlete, how many of them are actually doing some type of warm-up before they hit the court? Because if they're playing where I play, I'm the only one that's doing that. And so when we think about the why behind the what, hopefully this makes sense to us. All right, but we certainly want to raise that body temperature. All right, we want to activate muscles, we want to mobilize their joints and really potentiate the body, right? Rev up that nervous system to meet the demands of the ensuing sport. I'm a person who loves sport-specific warm-up. I don't particularly care for just general warm-up to just warm up the body. I like to get as much return on my investment. But if you are interested in something, Preston, my colleague here, and I have thrown something together in an article that was published for the NSCA Strength and Conditioning Journal. Very basic, okay, warm-up here. And I'm not claiming that this is the best warm-up. I wouldn't think to do that at all. But what we tried to do is put something together that was simple, that worked joint mobility, thoracic spine extension, tried to slowly build in terms of amplitude. And when you get out and you start watching people play, you're going to realize that getting onto the court is really competitive. And so there's only so much time. So provide them something that is digestible. Otherwise, they're not going to make the behavior change. They're not going to incorporate this. And we're just setting them up for, to get hurt if we're not adequately preparing them to step out onto the court and engage in this sport like an athlete, right? We're all athletes across the lifespan. So that's the next kind of active dynamic warm-up. But give me the results of that challenge. I want you to ask your patient, clients, athletes, how many of these are doing that? Let's just kind of see where those results fall. All right, step number 3 is to launch proactive training programs. Now, I'll fully admit I'm on the exercise continuum that is, what we call the prehab, right? Although I've worked with rehabilitation professionals, that's not necessarily my area, but the exercise continuum applies across all of those areas, from the prehab to the rehab. And what I would encourage you to do is, through connecting with your community, figure out a way to partner maybe with an exercise science professional or somebody where you can launch these proactive training programs to help people recognize that they need to be in shape, to play this particular sport. When we think a little bit about our society, I mentioned earlier, the pessimistic side of me, you know, they're deconditioned, and on one hand, they're playing to get them active, and that's great, but they're not ready. And then we have folks who are really well conditioned, but maybe they could use a little bit of support in really kind of honing into their training. In a best case scenario, folks would be engaging in strength training at least 2 times a week, maybe 3 times. I know this audience understands the value of strength training, but even if you can get them in a basic kind of circuit training approach, I think it can go a long way to supporting their health, all right, and their longevity for this sport. But I'm going to kind of just zone in real quick to this, even though I know I'm preaching to the choir. If you think back to number one, the highest demographic that's playing the sport is going to be over the age of 55. In whatever data we can extrapolate from the Weiss and the Forrester article, the folks that had the highest amount of injuries were people over the age of 55, right? So when we think about this concept of getting them into a strength training program that's proactive, we really do need to recognize that even though persons age in a diverse way, muscle quality, especially in the absence of not strength training, is going to diminish, and it can diminish, pretty rapidly, right? So we see certainly a loss of muscle quality. We see reduced nerve conduction velocity, or that impulse speed of that action potential transmitted along a motor neuron, and that's going to result in reduced, if it's a reduced impulse, right, to a reduced muscle contraction time. Reduction in type 2, like your fast twitch muscle fibers, power declines. So if you think of all of that, and then you match that with the demands of pickleball, we need speed, we need agility, we need power, we need reaction time, we need coordination. We need not only that, dynamic stability, right, of those load-bearing joints. We can see really the need for strength training. And with that latter piece, right, I mentioned the dynamic neuromuscular control. That's about that eccentric ability, right? Your ability to maintain this body control, to slow yourself down as you're trying to execute a racket skill or whatever it might be. And that's an incredible demand, certainly on the lower body. I'm just going to throw up here on this particular slide an example resistance training program that Preston and I put together from that NSCA article. When we wrote the article, I had hundreds of disclaimers. I'm just going to tell you this right now, that this is a broad stroke program. Certainly all of us would individualize programs when we work with our patients, our clients, and our athletes. But I'm going to just walk through the themes, right? So the themes being, whether we are on the prehab side or the rehab side, can we get our patient, client, athlete to demonstrate movement at some level of velocity, right? So training along that force velocity curve, can we get a power element and a speed element? Certainly we want strength. We want multi-joint, large cross-sectional muscles involved. We want to challenge them in different bases of support, not just a bilateral base of support, but certainly unilateral base of support. So again, those are some of the central themes here. Many ways that we can come at this, but if you're interested in just sharing something, here's a quick reference, but certainly providing some disclaimers here today that you can tweak this. I don't take offense. The goal is just to recognize the themes that can then hopefully support success on the pickleball court. When we started this deep dive, the question was, are we in a pickle? And, my answer to this is no, we're not. I think there's so many benefits that outweigh the risks. Number one, it's a high social engagement. All right. If you haven't figured this out, this is my dog at camp. He's highly social, and that facilitates his well-being. Just like when I play pickleball on the weekends, it facilitates my well-being. But adapting to the demands and training for the demands are needed to reduce those injury risks. And more research is needed. There's lots of places where there's gaps. Early on, I gave you that data set, okay, emergency room data. We need data from this decade. Psychosocial piece, we need to ask those questions of younger persons playing in this particular sport. All right. When we look at the physiological demands, we need to start assessing what happens again in maybe a little bit different demographic than what was represented in the Smith and Denning articles. And for our rehab professionals, we need to hear from you as far as what are you seeing in the clinic and get more of those maybe case reports out there in the literature so we can start to kind of string together a bigger and better, more comprehensive picture of what's happening with pickleball. And lastly, this is the optimistic side, not the pessimistic side of me. All of us have an opportunity to impact. I mean, with health recommendations of getting at least 150 minutes of physical activity a week to facilitate some positive health benefits and reduce maybe premature mortality risks associated with cardiovascular disease. Hey, if this gets people moving, great. But let's be those educators and support them so that they can do it safely. Within this particular presentation, these were the articles that I referenced. If you pull any of those articles here or some of the ones that maybe I name dropped earlier, you might be able to find an even more comprehensive reference page that's going to allow you to do some digging yourself. Now, if you don't want to work that hard, I did provide websites for you here. Unfortunately, we're running close to being out of time, but I will make a plug with this particular slide. This is a great inclusive sport, okay? So you're going to see lots of arenas where this can come to light. For instance, in the adaptive world, or Special Olympics is now offering pickleball as an option for persons with intellectual disabilities. I mean, how great is that? So across the lifespan and in several diverse arenas, it's a great opportunity to include people in something that can facilitate their health and well-being. If you'd like to learn more about pickleball, or, you know, hey, call me and let's go play, I've provided you with my contact information. I did a recent podcast with a group called the Pod Scholars. If you want to listen to me rant a little bit more about pickleball, you can certainly tune into that link as well. I appreciate your time. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to maybe a couple of questions. Thank you.
All right, so the first question comes from Russ. Given the risk of injury to the eye from the paddle, is there any report of dental injury, such as the knocked out teeth I saw from racquetball racket strikes, or is the paddle too light?
Oh, fantastic, fantastic question. Can you still hear me okay? I didn't click the wrong button, did I? Okay. I have not necessarily come across that, but I do think there's a possibility for that. You know, a lot of times we're going to recommend protective gear, and certainly a mouth guard would be something that to me would make sense here in this particular type of sport. Great question. To date in my inquiry, I have not found anything for that. But maybe the way we need to go is also adding mouth guards as a protective element here as well, not just the ocular piece.
Okay, the next question comes from Jessica. She said, I love it, fantastic presentation, and asked if there are any concussions reported with pickleball in the data bank.
Not yet, not that I could discern. And again, this is great. I love these audience questions, because what I think you're starting to see, and what's at least clear to me, is that when that court space is truncated and you're playing right next to somebody with another implement, what part of you can get hurt? That's certainly an area that we could see. Or again, with the type of falls that are possible, I think that's another mechanism that could lead to a concussion. But Jess, no, not yet. But it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen here soon, especially as you watch the level of play substantially increasing in terms of skills and abilities.
All right, and then the next question is, any research on another growing racket sport called paddle? And it looks like it's spelled P-A-D-E-L. It made its debut in the USA this year.
Oh, You stumped me on that one. So now I have homework to do. I really wish I could offer insight to that. I have not come across that, but now I'm interested. So I'm not the one that can help you there tonight. But hey, let's get together. You've got my contact information. Let me do some homework. And if I can come across something, I'd be happy to share what I've discovered now that you've given me something to look into as well.
Yes, and I have mispronounced it. It's pedal, I believe. I don't get the little phonetics in the comment box, but someone else jumped in. Emily jumped in here and said it's a much more competitive sport.
Okay, yeah. Even with the change in pronunciation, I can't offer any insight to that, but again, I'm super curious now. So thank you for expanding, things that I need to look into, and it'll be interesting to kind of see maybe the middle of the Venn diagram, between some of these sports.
All right, good. Good. Well, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you, Dr. Sara Terrell. I, certainly always appreciate. I know we had you come give a talk when we were still doing it in person at the time, so definitely appreciate you transitioning from, you were talking about FAI at that time, and now giving a talk here today on pickleball. It's definitely always a pleasure. Emily has a question here. Well, she says, okay, hold on. Not a question, but my wife is an ER physician and said she had a humeral head fracture with someone playing pickleball. Granted, it was a 90-year-old who fell. Oh, just an anecdote. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think most of us can relate to that mechanism of injury concern. And, in my experience, again, as an anecdote, that's where I've seen people really have some issues is taking a fall.
Well, thank you for your time as a speaker, and thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. Really, really appreciate it, and I look forward to the next one. And I'll actually be seeing you in person, it sounds like, in a couple of days.
Yes, looking forward to it, Dr. Henny. Appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity. And thank you, everybody, for listening and the gift of your time. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Have a good one, everyone.